Hello, welcome to episode 94 of this series where I'm programming a game from scratch for the original NES. Just a couple quick announcements. I know I have talked a little bit about pre-orders and code access. I still haven't really fully settled on what I want to do there yet, so that's really the only cause of the delay. I'm kind of annoyed with myself that it's been a couple of months, but I'm gonna circle back to that and trying to get that taken care of in the next couple of weeks, so that people who want to buy into that, they can pre-order the game and get access to the source code of the project. Under certain restrictions, then they can do that. And like I said, when the game is done, those people will get access to purchase a limited edition pre-order version of the cartridge. So there's that. And then episode 4 of the Zero Pages, a Getting Started episode, where we actually put together some code and work through what that code means for your starter project, is coming soon. At this point, what I think it's going to be is a format similar to me, like I do now, where we have Visual Studio Code open and we walk through the coding, rather than one of the highly edited videos. There will be some overlays to explain certain things as necessary, but it will just walk through the steps of putting the code down and getting a single sprite to appear on screen and explaining how that happens at the sort of most basic. So be on the lookout for that. And let's get started here today. So the goal for tonight is I kind of wanted to work on some of the more design element type things. I want to keep this video sort of time bounded to no more than an hour and a half, and work through how we're going to show enemies and what the enemies are going to do in the game from a design and visual perspective. So we've talked about it a little bit, but basically what I want to do is I want it so that we have the ability, so like for example, here's the level that you're flying over, here's the player. There are certain things that a lot of shooters do that I understand why they work this way, but I'd like to sort of change up the design that we're using to reflect this concept that I've talked about a little bit of wanting the game to feel really fast. So rather than having enemies kind of slowly progress down like we've had here before, if you think about the concept of a ship flying in this direction, if a ship were to be heading down in that direction at an opposing speed, then they are going to be flying by really quickly, and that's fine. Similarly, if you have enemies coming up from behind, unless they're trying to overtake the player, they're going to be coming up less fast. And this is, again, looking at it from the perspective of, a realistic approach to how this works. Now, the problem with that, of course, is if the enemy goes whizzing by super quick, well, there are a few problems with it. Potentially, we're skipping a lot of pixels as we move the ship along, because the velocity of the ship is translates to more than one pixel at a time. And so as a result, there may be the possibility that you have a bullet in this location that is not hit by the enemy as it jumps over that gap. So we need to come up with how we're going to handle these multi-pixel movements for ships that are faster. We also potentially have, or not potentially, there's also the problem of that if the ship is moving very quickly in this direction, then it's very unlikely that the player is actually going to be able to react quick enough to shoot the enemy ship down. And so again, this is why shooters traditionally don't approach this design this way, but I'd like to see if we could do something that would make this work. So before we do any of that, let's start with something a little bit simpler, because it'll kind of get us warmed up here. When the player or an enemy explodes, the explosion stays put, right? So the player transitions to an explosion, the explosion animation occurs, and then it goes away. Which is unrealistic if we are moving. So if we go to here, and I had done a few things here where I had moved the enemies down a little bit. I want to move them even further so that they spawn almost immediately. Let's export this. And remake the game. All right, so the reason they didn't spawn is a pretty simple one. The way that we're dealing with enemies, if you'll remember, is, or was I just impatient? Or did it not rebuild that properly? So if I have the enemies there, we gotta have them just outside the bounds of the first screen, right? And then export, and let's take a look. All these files say that they were just updated. Why? Well, replaced everything. Let's try. Maybe it didn't overwrite some of the files. It's possible that that's what happened. Let's see. Well, it might also be an issue of a discrepancy between the Y position of things in the map and in the game. That's okay. I don't want to deal with that right now. About the only thing I want to do is there are too many enemies. Let's just make one of each for now. I have them on the side. Oops, I gotta export it. Oh, that's why it's not working, because I didn't export. See, this is why having to remember to do these things manually is bad. I forgot to export the file to the map to the JSON file. So that's why those changes never actually took effect. Let's see what happens now. Did I not copy this over? Oh, and then I never built. Geez, what's going on with me today? There we go. Okay. So the reason I wanted to do that was because I wanted to have a manageable number of enemies on the screen that I could actually defeat, so we could make this happen. So if I have the enemy show up and I shoot it, the explosion shouldn't stay still, right? The explosion should continue onward, maybe at even a faster speed than what we're seeing there. So let's fix that here. Where is that code right now? Explode assembly. Yep. So that's the timer. And so we're not doing anything with the position right now. So what we want to do is increment y to continue sense of speed as game plays. So let's increment entities plus entity y, let's say y world position x. So if we just rebuild that, let's see what happens now if we explode the bad guy. Nothing. Why? I wonder if it's not doing anything with the world position. It's possible. That's. I think that may only be happening for the specific ships and whatnot. There we go. Okay, so now that continued on. I want to. Well, I don't know. I don't know if that's a. I don't know if that's an acceptable speed or not. If we move over to this part of the game where the ship is flying and it crashes into a wall. That seemed a little too fast. Should we maybe do it only when maybe we should only do it when we advance a frame? That might be too slow. No, that wasn't quite what I was looking for. Now, what's interesting is that the explosion, why did it move so quickly when it was the ships exploding? No, that was about what you would expect. So it's moving relatively similar to the speed of the background at that pace, which is what you would think. But you know, I think I want to keep the. I wonder if I want to work with the velocity of the enemy to continue that, because you'd think that whatever speed that the enemy is going at, the explosion would go at roughly the same speed. So let's see. So where are my? Is that all in flyby? I don't remember. Yeah, it looks like it. Okay, so this is, how is this handling? the speed at which they are traversing. So these guys are just, what? They're incrementing one at a time. Yeah, that speed seemed faster than that. Y position, but load A, X, Y position. Oh, it's once every frame, not once every cycle. So I guess what we would want to do is, realistically what we would want to do is use the prior velocity, right, to handle this rather than having it hard coded. The enemies don't currently use the velocity at all, so we could fix that. Okay, yeah, that is the right speed. So, we have the X velocity and the Y velocity. I don't remember. I think we were doing some sort of division of the value or shifting of the value so that we could get fractional movement here. But maybe not. Maybe we weren't. Were we just doing increment, and then if it was exceeding the maximum volume, velocity, then it was capping it? It's F8. Max velocity is 8. Max N velocity. We're not using that. What's this? We're not using either of those. Or is that in this? Oh, okay. We were doing it in here. Max negative velocity. That's what that was. Okay. The problem with all of this is that it's kind of a big kludge the way it's being handled. We're essentially just forcing it to increment at some particular value. Increment at, I think it's just incrementing by 1, and then we're doing, are we doing a fractional amount? I guess we must be doing a fractional amount, but it's like a very, very low resolution fractional amount. I don't remember because it's been a while. So let's take a look at this. Offset entity by camera, calculate screen position, X velocity, load X velocity. If it's 0, we're done. If it's positive, then we're going to remove X velocity. Otherwise, set carry subtract max N velocities. This is, we're checking to see if it's larger than, we're checking to see if it's bigger than or less than, through that whole convoluted subtract BVCE or process. And then let's see, branch plus, load max end velocity, store it into, so if it's bigger than that, we store the maximum negative velocity into XV, and then we jump to skip X, and okay, so, and then when do we actually add that to the entity position? So we're dividing by, well, this is actually divided by 4, not by, oh, we're shifting to, right, yeah, so we're shifting to, and then adding the X position to it. So the most that the player will ever move is, what? The most that the player will ever move is 4 pixels at a time, because the maximum velocity is 8, and then we're dividing by 4, oh no, sorry, 2 pixels at a time, because we're taking 8 and divided by 4, both in the positive and the negative condition. So it caps out the speed, which, I mean, it's not, the player isn't really slow, right? Player is moving maybe even faster than, no, that's probably an okay speed. The thing that I don't like is that we're not getting any, we don't have any sense of like, well, yeah, it's not really doing kind of a little bit of a slowdown. It doesn't really feel like it has a lot of momentum to the movement, which isn't super important. I guess especially for a shooter, it's better to have it be accurate. It's not as bad as it being just like 1-to-1, you know, as soon as you let go, it stops on a pixel, but it's, I don't know, it's something we can play with. We're going to want to have some ability to have precise movements, because we are going to have sections where there's a lot going on that you have to avoid. Sections like this where the player is, where the background is moving very slow, these are going to be sections at high altitude, and so you're mostly going to be facing flying enemies, versus the lower altitude sections where the background will be moving at a faster speed, but the majority of what you'll be facing is, well, I shouldn't say that. It'll be a combination of enemies and also things like turrets and you know, things that have some you know, something that they can anchor to, like on the ground. I guess that's okay. So let's look at what we're going to do, or attempt to do, with the enemies. Going back to it now. So right now the enemies fly in and they shoot, I believe they shoot just a pattern of 3 every, I just looked at it but I wasn't really paying attention. It's just a 3 spread, right? So they're just, they come in, enemy comes in, and then it shoots like that, right? Very simple. It's either minus X, Y, right? We're subtracting from the X and we're adding to the Y, or we're adding to just the Y, or we're adding to the X and the Y. Very simple pattern is meant just to get things kind of going. So as we were talking about before, I want to have the ships potentially flying this way. How would we do something like that? So, and this is the part that's less about programming, obviously, and more about just the design of the game. So we've got player here. I mean, obviously you could have a situation where a ship comes up from behind and starts firing, but then if the player doesn't have hit points or some way of knowing that the enemy ship is coming from underneath, it's not really a fair design, right? Like, they shouldn't have to memorize that, you know, in this part of the level they have to be over to the left, and in this part they have to be over to the right necessarily. Like, there should be some ability to read and play through the level the first time with some degree of competency that doesn't rely purely on memorization. So the only thing I can think of is that the enemies, when they're spawned, would deliberately have to spawn outside of deliberately have to spawn in a way that they are not directly underneath the player, and then could cross in to try and intercept the player's location from when they spawned. So if the player is here, now the player could obviously be moving this way, and so you'd want them to adjust their trajectory to try and catch the player. And if the player is moving back and forth, they might overshoot, you know, and kind of take this curve approach. Let's try and build something like that and see what that looks like. So what we're going to find with this is that we're going to find that the design portion of all of this work is going to be a lot less methodical, or I don't know what the right word is, but it's going to be a lot less like cut and dry. This is going to be more about testing things out, seeing what looks good, what plays well, what makes sense, doing things where we are exploring ideas, and we're not going to be afraid to get rid of something just because we spent a lot of time to make it work if it doesn't work in the game as a whole. I mean, that's critically important to any game design, or any project, really. There's, you know, this expression I've heard used that, you know, what you're working on, you shouldn't think of it as precious. And basically all that means is you should be willing to take the best ideas, not the ideas that you have the most vested in or you spent the longest time working on, and, you know, you can throw away things easily. Before I toss this, though, I want to see if I have this. I believe this is in source tree, but I don't want to be wrong and then have to rewrite this. Not that it was tremendously hard, but just felt like it's better not to have to deal with that if we don't have to. Okay, it is. It's relatively okay. Yep, cool. All right, so let's get rid of this, and let's see. So all this is doing when it's done is just exiting. So, all right, so we can get rid of this. Let's just start with making the ship start at the bottom of the screen. So what we'll do is we'll use the data variable as maybe a set of flags, bit flags. So what we'll do is we'll load a entities plus entity data x, and it with one branch branch if equal branch if not equal to already initialized is there. Enemy is out for the first time. Set up the Y position to be the bottom of the screen, and then set the init bit. Right. So we're going to load A, and the bottom of the screen, the Y position is F0, so we'll load A with F0, store it in entities, entity Y position X. We can just increment entities plus entity data X. That will set the variable to from 0 to 1. Although technically, you know what we can do? Let's just load this and store it, just in case at some point we put other information in there. And then you never know, we might end up doing something like that. Alright, so now if it's already been initialized correctly with the Y position, then what we want to do is we want to start subtracting from that Y position. So we can even say this should be F1, and then we're going to decrement entity Y position X, because we're moving from the bottom of the screen to the top of the screen, and then load it A with that variable, and then branch if equal, if it's 0 to let's jump if it's not 0. So branch if not equal to enemy not complete. Oops. This is enemy complete. And then what did we do? We just did a simple branch to clear entity, I think. Jump. Where is that? Jump to clear entity. Jump to clear entity. So if we hit 0, then it should clear the entity. That's not 100% right, but let's just try that and make sure that we got some of this going the way that we want to, and we'll explain why in a moment. Enemy not complete. So let's start with, we should see the enemies spawn from the bottom and go up, which is going to look weird because they're facing the wrong direction, but that's okay. Alright, so that was decent. One thing you'll probably have noticed is that when they started from the top, were visible for a brief moment there, and that we have to address. Well, how do we address that? We address that by not drawing the sprites that would roll over, because this is what I was saying when I was saying it wasn't 100% correct. We're storing, so the screen at the bottom of the screen is 240, when you have Y as 240 here, I believe what it's going to do is it's going to start drawing that at the, is there a 8 or 16 bit there's some sort of allowance there for drawing off screen, and I don't remember exactly what it is. So let's take a look at that. Sprite data is, you must subtract one from before writing it here. Hide a sprite by writing any value in EF to FF. So EF to 256. So what we want to do is, that was fine. It's the draw entities that's not fine, and that's because if we look at this, what it's doing, it's drawing a few different sprites, right? And it's adding to the Y, and if the Y overflows the coordinate on the screen, then we will have a problem. So like here, where we are x0, y, so this is the y position, load y position, clear carry and add 8, add carry, branch if carry set to skip skip hide, or we don't even want to do that. Branch carry set to this, that's this, and then load A with FF. We just basically want to hide it at that point. And this is going to be true of any of these where we are working with the Y position. We have to add that to the output. But let's hard code it for now and see if we get any luck here with this approach. Because if the carry is set, then we added to a value that went past FF and became 0. Rolled over and went from, whatever it was to past 0, which means it shows up at the top, which is not what we want. I'm not even sure we want to use FF, but we'll mess around with that in here. That's relatively easy to do. We only care about this when we increment the Y position. And this will be easy to put into the asset tool, but right now I just wanted to test this out and see if I'm thinking about this the right way. Oh, for the explosions. Okay, yeah, I'm not going to worry about the explosions right now. Because that will be a long, boring process to manually edit that. Why is the carry set? What did I do wrong? Load a. Let's go back to this for a second. So, like, if I add carry, what is this? This is the explosions. Let's go to player sprite, load a Y position, clear carry, add carry with 8, branch carry set. Why would the carry be set in that situation? It would only be set if it, or it should only be set. All right, let's try something different here. So this is the Y position. If it's greater than 0, then we want to do branch carry Oh, because I'm reversing conditions. If the carry is clear, then we go to the next location, and then that was just dumb. And then we want to load A with FF and store A. No, we don't want to store A. And then this is our new label. And then that should be all we need to do. This doesn't not need a tab. All right, so let's build that. And then export that. And then grab the exported files. Oops, there. So let's look at what we've got here. So if we are, yeah, clear carry, add carry, branch carry, clear. Yeah, that was why it was wrong, because I was doing branch of carry set, which is the reverse condition, which is just dumb. Oops. All right, so that is, and part of me doing stuff like that is because I'm explaining it as I'm doing it, and you know, just doing silly things. So let's see if that looked right. Yeah, so now it's not showing up on the top anymore, and they just fly in backwards, and I destroyed it. Okay. So now that we have that, what we want to do is we want to have the ship increment its X in the direction of the player, right? So that's this. We decrement, and then we want to say load entities plus entity y position, x position, and 0 is always the player's position. We could even do something where we check the type. I don't know that I care about that right now, unless it yields some sort of weird result that we weren't expecting. So now, let's see. So if the player's X position, if we go back to clear this up for a second here. If the player's X position is greater than, then what we want to end up with is that we, let's see. So if I take the X position of the ship and I subtract it from the player, in this scenario, we should get what, an overflow bit set, or let's test this out. Let's see. That's why Easy6502 is excellent. So if we load A with say we're at the middle of the screen for the player ship. It's 80. All right, and we'll store that in 0. Just so we have something here. So if we load, the enemy location is, let's say, 16, and we compare that to 0. What do we get? We get N is set and V is not, and no carry. Now if we reverse this, we get a carry and N is not set. So if the carry, well, so basically what it's doing is it's, if we think back to what we were talking about or how we were doing it the other day. If we did this as a subtract, we would say, okay, we want to subtract this player position from the enemy position. So you'd set the carry and subtract these two, and ultimately, if the player is greater than, the carry would be cleared, right? If we take the same example, if we set the carry and then we subtract, the carry would be cleared even though we had set it, and if the reverse were true, then the carry would still be set, and the carry is still set. So that's what we want to test. We want to say, okay, so that's our X position in A, and then we want to set the compare with entities X position X. So basically we're saying, let's set the carry and subtract the player position, subtract the enemy position from the player position. So if the enemy position is greater, then the carry will be clear, otherwise it will still be set. So branch carry clear to this. So if the carry is clear, then it was greater than, so we want to, what was greater than? The enemy position was greater than, so we want to subtract this. Otherwise, we want to increment the X position because it was less than. Hopefully I didn't confuse myself on that one. We'll find out in a moment, and what should happen is the enemy ships should fly in towards the player. Nope, I confused myself. Why is that? Get the enemy position, the player position, and we compare the enemy position, and if the carry is still set, then the player position is bigger. Well, that seems right. Is this a problem because it's not, you can't do that, but it should be, that should be fine because it's 0. Let's take a look at this code in action. Let's see what silly thing I've done this time. I don't know what all these are older breakpoints that we don't need anymore. Let's go back to this. So we're going to break when the enemies appear on screen. Okay, so we've got the player X position, which is right in the middle, and we're going to compare the enemy X position, and the carry is set. So that means that the enemy was less. Yeah, I would just reverse the conditions. If the carry is set, then we want to, well, did I reverse the conditions, or am I reversing my understanding of compare? See, I had been doing the set carry compare, so set carry subtract for comparison, and that's in some ways easier to understand. Compare sets flags as if subtraction had been carried out. If the value of the accumulator is greater, equal or greater, then the carry will be set. So, yeah, if the carry is set, then the player position is bigger. Then the, yeah, I just reversed the condition. Okay. Compare. So we're incrementing the X positions. This should now, they should kind of like try to match the X position completely here. Yeah, see, they kind of flew in and crashed into the player, so that's not exactly what we want. Let's see, how do we want to do that up until the point where we have passed the Y position of the player, because at that point it doesn't matter anymore, and I just want to continue in the, do I want to just continue in the, so to make sort of that S shape that we had here, and it's not that that's super important, but what we were doing is we were doing this. Or the ships are doing this. They're doing a direct line. And what I was saying is they should come out and sort of angle more into the direction of the player. I mean, I guess I don't have a problem with them going that way, and then once they pass the Y, continuing on in that direction. I liked the idea of it being sort of more of a gradual shift. The problem with doing that is the build-up for that requires like a sense of the momentum of the ship movement, so we can't just keep adding to the X position. What we would need to do is, I guess, add to the X velocity and then add that to the X position as it builds up the velocity. Something like, based on this, what we'll do is we'll either do this or do this, and then this is not right either, so I'm not expecting this to work, but something like this. So clear carry and then add carry. So we modify the velocity and then we add it to the this autocomplete is being annoying. We load the X position, we add the velocity to it, and then we gotta store it back, obviously. So this is going to be comically bad, but let's see what that actually looks like. Can't be any worse than some of the other silly things that I've done. Trailing garbage 22. Load A, entities, entity colon XV. And then, oh no, X position. That's what I wanted. Okay. Let's see if this is even remotely usable. What we would probably need to do is increment the velocity a little bit slower, because I suspect that they're going to, yeah. So that's actually kind of cool, but not what I was going for. So what it's doing is it's kind of wildly incrementing and decrementing the x velocity at a rate that's much too high to use. So what we should do here is we should increment this, and then, or load that, I mean to say, and then load A, and then we load A with a value that is technically considered negative. Load A 3, let's say F0, symbol run, and then if we do 20, that n bit should be set. Right, so let's see, so if it's branch minus to negative divide, so basically if it's positive, we just do let's say we're going to rotate right. We're going to rotate, we're divide by 4-ish. Let's see, the maximum value we can get is 120, was it 127? I always forget, it's minus 128 to 127, right? Is it minus 127 to 127? I always thought, I don't know, whatever, it's close enough, right? So 127, that's 7F, and where was I going with this? Oh, divide by 4, that's too many. 127 divided by, let's say, 8. 127 divided by 16. I want it to be no more than like 3 pixels, so 42. So divide by 32, so that's 5 shifts. 3, 4, 5. For negative divide, it's more complicated because it's still a shift, but it's a shift. Is it a shift right still? It's a shift right. Well, it's a rotate. Let's look at this. So it's, if we do F0, that is 0 minus 16. Is that right? Minus 16. So that's minus 16. And then what we should get is if we shift it to the right by 1. Oh, it's just an. Oh, right. Okay, I remember now. It's not just a rotate right. You have to set the carry and rotate because you need the highest bit to be set properly. So if you have you load A with F0, if you just do a let's just do it here, a rotate right, you're going to get 7, 8, which if you 7, 8, if you look, what it did was it shifted those bits, but that bit became 0, which it's not supposed to. So what we need to do is set the carry and then rotate, and then we'll get F8. So we went from F0, do it in decimal please. If we went to from F0 to F8, which is -8. So that's good. That's what we want. So we want to just keep doing that. We want to set the carry and rotate 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's see if that yields a little bit of a more smooth motion without sort of ping-ponging back and forth. And like I said, what we need to do is we also need to make it that if the player's Y position is past where it is, that it doesn't bother anymore. Maybe it's past... Oh, well, that's not right at all. I have a feeling I probably... mess this up too. Let's see, branch minus, load A. Well, that should be right. If I load A with that and say branch minus to set A, so then if it's so branch of minus to set A, which will set A to 2, and then we have done. Otherwise, it will load A with 1. So this was minus, so it set it to 2. If we had 0F, on the other hand, we should have 1. So that part's okay. So that's good. I didn't mess up that. I assume that it's some other mathematical error, though, just with whatever, however we're dealing with the velocity, and it's nonsense. So let's look at this here. So we're incrementing or decrementing the velocity, and then at this point we're loading it and checking to see if it's minus or positive. Let's see how that looks. Alright, so the velocity here is 1. It's not negative, so now we're just... Oh, we gotta clear that carry if we're rotating right for the first time. That, yep. Alright, so... well, or we just use logical shift right instead of rotate. Okay, simple, oops, reason why that didn't work. So whatever the carry was, it was causing it to, you know, get added to the most significant bit, which would have created sort of a weird behavior. So let's scroll through and get the enemy loaded. See, there was part of me that was going, rotate it doesn't seem right there, but I didn't know why at the moment, so I just kind of went with it. So we have 1, and we're gonna shift it out of, shift it into oblivion essentially. Clear carry, and add the X position, and then we store it, and so nothing really changed there. And this one becomes FE because we subtracted, and it's minus, so we're gonna set the carry and keep dividing, and again that gets shifted into oblivion as well. Alright, so that's looking better. That actually went at a smoother pace than it did before. And obviously, depending on the enemy's position, it will reach it at potentially different points. Now the problem is also that because of the speed of the enemy, it's not following it's not actually, so that's not a how to explain that it isn't a that's not going to work in the sense that I wanted, because what it's doing is it's saying, and I should have thought of this, but like if the enemy is here and the player is here, it's going to increase the velocity this way, and then it's going to go past, and then it's going to go back that way, and it's because it's not tracking to a specific position like it was before, where it was just like trying to get right onto that spot. It wasn't also, we're gonna have to come up with something a little more sophisticated than just a straight line across. But let's, I'm trying to think what we can do for now. I have to do some research about what's the best way to calculate the curve that I'm looking for. It may not even be possible with the CPU of the NES to do that in the way that people are would describe online, and we'll have to figure out a way to figure out a way to make it something that is efficient enough. Because if it's using things like trig and sine, cosine, that kind of stuff, that's not going to. There are lookup tables you can use, which will be much faster and more efficient. But that just straight up using sine, cosine, and stuff, that's too. Even if it existed in the CPU, it'd be too slow. So let's see. I'm trying to think what would be a logic, like what should be happening is with a constant Y position. Well, I guess the Y, that's the issue, is that the Y position can't be constant in order to match the position. It's almost like you need to. Yeah, I gotta look at what's the right way to draw. I mean, this looks like a spline or a Bezier curve. So let's stick with the sort of simple kind of tracking to the X directly at a constant speed, with the Y position determining whether or not it continues to try and track in that direction. I mean, we could even let's just leave it at that, because there are all sorts of variants we could do in terms of the well, a lot of things, I guess. For the sorry, I'm like thinking about it and trying to explain it. We could do things like, we could say, okay, well, calculate at the current Y velocity what the X velocity would need to be to draw like a proper line to hit this spot. But the problem is that if the player moves, then the enemy is going to a spot that's no longer relevant. We want the enemy to kind of track what the player is doing. We're starting with that position not being directly behind, like I said, because we don't want it to be completely unfair where the player doesn't have any ability to dodge or avoid the enemy. This at least gives them the ability, when they see where the enemy is coming in, to avoid that. So I think what I'll do is, for now, just have it that it's going to try and, sort of just adjust the X velocity. Well, that's what it was doing. Let me look at that again. I'm not convinced it's not okay, but I'm not really pleased with the way it looks right now. But maybe it's enough to play test with for right now and see if it gives us other ideas. The issue is that it's going past the player. I really don't want it to. to do that. Let's do this also. I want to compare the player position, and if the player position is greater than the enemy Y position, then we're just going to stop messing with the X velocity and continue to just add it as is. So if we do the comparison, the Y position that we are comparing against is the enemy. So if the enemy position is greater than, then the carry will be set still. So we only care about if the carry is clear, because then the ship position was greater than the enemy position. So branch carry clear to skip player, skip enemy, horizontal adjust, something like that, I guess. And just, oh, you know what we can do? Let's see. We can just go right to done X movement. So basically, if we're past the player ship with the enemy, then don't bother adjusting the velocity anymore. Just kind of ride it out. Come on. Now that has its own potential issue where you might hit the edge of the screen, and yeah, and that was what had happened with the one ship. It attempted to it hit the one edge of the screen and then wrapped around because of the X velocity, but that's easy enough to fix. I don't know that I care enough about that right now to do anything about it. I mean, we could also just do a fixed pattern of enemy waves coming in like that. Kind of liked the idea of it being something that adjusts to the player's position a little bit, but again, then it kind of, otherwise, I don't know. This is what was kind of keeping me, not keeping me up at night, but certainly making me concerned with my desire to sort of deviate and use something that's maybe a little bit more, I don't know, realistic is obviously not the right word, but not in the same exact way that a normal traditional shooter would do it. So if we add a few enemies, let's see what happens if we have like a wave of enemies coming through. They're not close enough to actually form a wave. The other thing is, like, the movement is kind of dumb because they're not able to actually hit the player at all, and at a minimum they should be trying to at least collide with the player to take the ship out. It's nice that all the tools are actually working the way that I want. except that I did not copy over the exported files. Yeah, we're gonna have to fix that soon. Making me do that every time we make a change is kind of defeats the whole purpose of all of these command line tools that I'm building. So there we go. So we've got a wave of enemies that came in and kind of weirdly completely missed the player. Yeah, not quite the experience I was going for. I mean, obviously the way that I'm approaching this movement is super basic, and we should probably look into some more interesting ways of approaching it and not allowing the ships to go flying off the sides of the screen, whether that's pre-described patterns of motion with some tweaks based on the player position, or you know, I don't actually know what I want it to do. But that said, I'm not totally hating this approach of the ships coming in from the bottom. I feel like the only thing is I want them to be faster. I feel like they're not maybe not going quite as quickly as I would like them to. Yeah, that felt way more like what I was expecting. Obviously the motion is still dumb, but that's more what I was kind of envisioning, is that sort of speed of them coming in and trying to sort of ambush the player. Maybe for those we just do it in sort of a did I break the bullet collision by doing this? Is the bullets can't actually collide with the enemies anymore? Seems like they're just impervious to my attacks. I assume that is, let's see, check player collision. Let's see, where's the bullet code? Nope, that's the char data. Enemy bullet. Check player collision. That's just the check bullet collision. Surprised that it's not colliding at all. It's kind of weird. Again, it might be somehow tied to the speed. that the bullets just simply can't catch up. Yeah, so that's what it was. It was because that one enemy, that actually looked pretty cool when that happened. The one enemy did get hit by the bullet there. But it was sort of a weird thing of, because of the speed that they're moving at. This is what I was talking about before, that I was kind of alluding to, that, you know, as things move at multiple pixel increments, sometimes you get what looks like collision misses. So we'll have to look into how to do that correctly without, you know, slowing down the game tremendously, just for fun. Let's go crazy and add a huge number of enemies here before we wrap it up tonight, just to laugh at how bad this is going to be. Or maybe not. Maybe it'll be cool. I don't know. Place that. Export the whole thing. Then you have to copy the export over. And then make. And then do this and that. Let's see what that looks like with all those enemies. That was actually kind of cool. I mean, it didn't do what I wanted it to do in the sense of, you know, well, that sort of did it. I'm not crazy with the movement as it is. Obviously, it's not good, but let's do this. We decrement the Y position. Yeah, let's just do this. Let's just work with the Y for now. While I have to do some research about how that movement needs to look. But I'm satisfied with the way the enemies are coming in and how they look. That definitely conveys speed despite them being backwards. An interesting little side effect of the way the enemies are placed on the map in order to spawn is that if you want them to spawn right one after another, you really gotta kind of get them tight into the map that way. I don't know if that's going to be a problem or not. I don't think it will, but it's just something interesting to note in the way that that's working. And I mean, it makes sense because it uses the position of the enemy on the map to determine when it should spawn, right? And so if you want it to spawn one after another after each pixel, then they have to be a pixel apart. So it's logical, maybe just a little annoying potentially. So the left should spawn faster than the right. Yep. But that's cool. That's, you know, again, this is all sort of now me experimenting with how to do things, and as a result coming up with research items that we need. So I'm going to call it for now because there's not much I can do without actually going and doing that research. So, as always, thank you for watching. If you have any questions, you can reach me on Twitter at Clairvis. You can also comment on the video on YouTube or come on to the Discord for Nintendo Age. I am Zelius there. Yeah, and stay tuned for the things I mentioned at the beginning, both the pre-order and the what was the other thing? Oh, and Zero Pages episode 4. Glad everybody is still finding those useful and getting a lot of views on those, and it's pretty excellent to see so many people interested in NES programming. But anyway, until next time on Thursday when we live stream, have a great couple of days and see you next time.